I've talked a lot about old school D&D related retro clones and modules over the years, but never what it was like if you enjoyed using miniatures in the early days of D&D, back in the rough and ready time of 1981. Miniatures for your D&D game weren't nearly as ubiquitous as they are now, and the ones you could find weren't cheap, especially if you wanted enough for a full table. Most groups played Theater of the Mind not so much as an aesthetic choice, but out of necessity. However, if you wanted to give your players a more visual experience, what were your options? When I got into the hobby in 1981, Grenadier had just released a line of official miniatures for AD&D. So today, let's take a nostalgic look back and dungeon crawl like it's 1981, right here on RPG Retro Reviews. In 1981, I first got into the Dungeons & Dragons game with the eponymous Moldvay Basic set, and thus began a lifelong love of fantasy gaming that has, at this point, lasted 44 years. I have a vast collection of miniatures and dungeon terrain that I've spent decades collecting and painting, and in many ways the enjoyment I get from painting and creating scenes for my game is as much of a joy as actually playing the game itself. If you're going to play D&D, miniatures are great, but you also need dice. Dice that can inspire you or even better. That's why I recommend Dice Nest. As gamers, we all love dice. Certainly there's a dice goblin at your table with a vast collection of unique and amazing dice sets. It's the randomness of dice that partly determines the fate of your adventures, and that gives them a kind of magical power. Let me introduce you to Dice Nest. Dice Nest is a unique crafter of high-quality polyhedral dice who don't simply make dice for your fantastical games, but nurtures those stories and your imagination through the beauty of their creations. There is the Crimson Bloom set with a real preserved flower within each die, frozen in time like a moment of passion made eternal. The Arcane Gateway dice series are engraved with mystic runes and crafted from genuine precious stones like Siu Jade. These dice seem to carry the power of ancient spells, ready to transport you into a world of fantasy and mystery. Or my personal favorite, the Prismatic Radiance dice cut from K9 prismatic glass in a unique, multifaceted method. The light dazzles and refracts hypnotically in a spectrum of color. The pictures here just don't do these justice. Dice Nest was kind enough to actually send these to me, and when I showed them to my players, they were just blown away. There is a vast array of dice sets at Dice Nest's website that is sure to appeal to your inner dice goblin. And thanks to this collaboration with Dice Nest, you can save 15% off your purchase when you enter Captain Courageous at checkout. Add to the magic of the gaming experience at your table with Dice Nest today, and game on. Thank you, Dice Nest. When I first started playing D&D in 1981, we didn't have miniatures or terrain, and being teenagers, not a lot of money. Though once I got a job as a stock clerk at Sears, I had a bit more spending cash for such things, and also I could now drive my parents' car. Man, those were the days. Interestingly enough, that same year the Dark Tower game by Milton Bradley was released, which I got for Christmas. These 4 miniatures were prominent in my games for many years, but I'm sure I'm not the only one who used these for their D&D games. In addition to some rather artistically rendered graph paper maps to go by, we used chess pieces, tokens, scrounges from old Monopoly games, and even cardboard cutouts. Some of the artwork from the 1E Monster Manual did lend itself to photocopying, and with some colored pencils, cardstock paper, and the like, a rather artistic stand-up could be rendered. But it was lead miniatures that really captured our imagination. Gary Gygax's description of using miniatures for the game in the original first edition Dungeon Master's Guide was also pretty convincing. Here Gary states, "Miniature figures used to represent characters and monsters add color and life to the game. They also make the task of refereeing action, particularly combat, easier too. In combination with a gridded surface such as the dungeon floor plans to be published by TSR in the near future, these miniatures will add a whole new dimension to your playing enjoyment. It is suggested that you urge your players to provide painted figures representing their characters, henchmen and hirelings involved in play. The monsters can be furnished by you, possibly purchased through collection of small fees levied on each playing session. The official Advanced Dungeons & Dragons miniature figures will be released by Grenadier Models about November 1979. These figures are the only ones which comply in all respects to AD&D specifications and the AD&D Monster Manual." Gygax was such a salesman. But it is pretty evocative, isn't it? Grenadier dubbed the AD&D miniatures the Solid Gold Line, inferring that Grenadier's lead miniatures were worth their weight in gold to the D&D gamer. Grenadier did actually run a contest from 1982 to 1983 called the Wizard's Gold Contest, whereby gold-plated miniatures were randomly inserted in some of the box sets. I can't imagine what one of those would be worth today. Has anyone ever seen one of these? Man, that'd be a real piece of gaming history. Anyway, the quality of the miniatures themselves varied greatly, but there can be no doubt that the artwork from those boxes were iconic. I mean, even today, looking at this art just sets fire to the imagination. The boxes came with foam inserts to protect the miniatures, so they also doubled as storage boxes. On eBay these days, just the empty box in good condition can fetch a pretty decent price, and the miniatures are very expensive to acquire. But back in those days, seeing miniatures, even when we had them painted badly, all lined up on the table in the marching order of our characters, greatly enhanced our immersion. I remember using Tester's model paints on these, and wow, they were terrible looking by today's standards, but we didn't care. In those days, the 10-count box set sold for about $15, and the 20-count boxes sold for about $25, so it was way too expensive for a teenager to try and collect a decent number of miniatures. Initially, we didn't really use them for combat. Their primary function was to show the party's marching order and how the party was situated at a door, the mundane aspects of dungeon crawling. We didn't have a battle mat or dungeon tiles, just the dining room table. But we did map on graph paper, so between the party map and the miniatures, our imaginations filled in the rest. For a door, we just stacked 2 6-sided dice up, and then at one point my friend Jim got the Heritage USA's dungeon tiles. I did a whole video on these a few years ago. If you want more information on the history of that set, check out the card above. But until Chessex came out with the vinyl Batamat in 1983, that's what we used. Later on, I got the idea of drawing up a dungeon door, as the ones that came with the Heritage USA set were little more than cardboard squares. They were terrible, and I wanted something more 3D-like. Our local public library had recently got a photocopier, which to that point we had mostly used to copy SSDs for Starfleet battles. But I drew up a door much like you see here in this example, as the original photocopies are long since gone. And then ran off a bunch of copies at 15 cents a piece. And from that point, it was a cut and paste project. Then photocopy and cut and paste some more to get them repeated onto a single sheet of paper, much like what you're seeing here, but without the color. And then I pasted them to a cereal box cardstock and colored them in with colored pencils. Here I've recreated the look, but with modern scanning technology in my paint program, I was able to accomplish this in minutes. I only had to color in one door with colored pencils and then just manually scan that into the computer and copy and repeat and print them out on photo paper. And back then I had to manually color in every single door. Either way, this was a cheap way to get some good looking dungeon doors for our adventures. Eventually, of course, we wanted monsters, goblins, orcs, skeletons. Those were hard to come by, and the really unique monsters like beholders were near impossible to get. But I did like to check out the toy section of the drugstore to see what I might find, and I managed to acquire some cool dinosaurs, which in turn inspired a Land of the Lost type adventure. Land of the Lost being a Saturday morning TV show by Sid and Marty Krofft that was popular in the 1970s. Here the PCs ended up in a prehistoric land populated by Neanderthals and dinosaurs. This dinosaur set I'm showing here I actually recently got off of Amazon, but it does emulate the kinds of plastic monsters we were using back in the 80s. Interestingly enough, in the early days of D&D, Gary Gygax made a very similar pilgrimage to the local drugstore, only he stumbled across a set of prehistoric animals from some Hong Kong toy company, and from those came the carrion crawler, the umberhawk, the rust monster, the purple worm, and Tim Cast created the Boulet, as he says, as it was initially called, which was Tim's first monster he created for the game. He nicknamed it the Land Shark as a joke, referring to the then popular Saturday Night Live skit. That itself was a play on the popular movie Jaws, whereby an intelligent shark would walk around and knock on women's doors pretending to be a delivery person of some sort. Candygram! And then eat them when they open the door. If you've never heard or seen this skit, then you're missing out. YouTube has it up if you search, so give it a watch if you want to laugh. Of course, I wanted more. The Dungeon Doors project gave me the idea of the monster stand-ups. I could just photocopy a monster from the monster manual, use the adjustment on the copier to scale it up or down, and voila! Not all art in the monster manual would work for this, but a lot of it did. Here's a recreation of my beholder, photocopied directly from the pages of the first edition monster manual. The Grenadier Gold Line sets I personally managed to collect were the Dungeon Explorers, the Swamp Denizens, and the Dwellers Below. Of course, over time I sold or lost most of these sets, but I've also managed to reacquire some of them. The snake miniature from the Swamp Denizen set is, to me, the most iconic giant snake miniature anyone has ever done. I mean, look at this thing. It's a menace. Looking at just the painted miniatures on the table with a monster in a scene like this really just sparks the imagination for me. No terrain, no battle mat, just the table and painted miniatures. This thief miniature here from the Explorer set was the one I used for my thief character, Ra's al Ghul, for many years. And yes, I know, not that original of a name, but I really liked it. Ross was neutrally evil. Of course he was. But he had standards. He never stole from the party and never did anything intentionally to hurt them, for the most part. There was the time that we were climbing up a mountainside and Ross was in the lead as he had the rope use proficiency. Unfortunately, the party all failed their rope use rolls badly, as I recall, and the DM had the pitons driven into the rock, began to come away, and the entire party was hanging by the rope, and yeah, I just cut it, let them fall. Did I mention that I had a ring of flying? So after they all fell to the canyon below, incurring great injury and mostly near death, I flew down, ruffled through their pockets for some health potions, and of course only the healing potions, and then brought them back to mostly alive, if not full health. Can you believe that they were less than grateful? Some people. Anyway, it should be noted that many of these sets already existed prior to Grenadier's acquisition of the AD&D license and were basically rebranded for the AD&D line. After the license ceased in 1983, these box sets would continue on, but without the official seal of the AD&D logo. The Gold Line focused primarily on character figures, but there was also a healthy line of monsters. The first set is the 2001 line Wizards. After that, Halflings, and then Dwarves, a box of Hirelings. Hirelings were a major part of the game in the early days, and having someone to carry your torch or lantern or treasure chest was pretty darn important. Next up was Fighting Men, followed by Specialists. This was a set that contained monks, paladins, bards, and the like. Now you might notice that something seems to be missing from this line, but none to worry. Grenadier would answer the issue with the 2000 box set titled Females. I'm not exactly sure that really caters to the women players of the game, but anyway. Now, of course, what this line really needs is the most important class, Thieves. You get a whole guild in this one. One of my favorite sets, and the one I still have, is the Wizard's Room. From the boxed art to the included miniatures, this one really speaks to me. The wizard's desk is a cluttered mess of scrolls and parchments. Beneath his desk, his watch lizard lies in wait to protect his master from intruders. And what exactly is this wizard calling forth from that cauldron? Oh, creepy. The shelf, too, is cluttered with tomes of arcane lore, sorceress scrolls, and enigmatic locked boxes that certainly must contain some magical treasure. The Denizens of the Swamp set was one I had back in the day. To me, the Shambling Mound was always a creature that terrified me. So too the regenerative trolls, the basilisk, and of course that giant snake. And what's a D&D game without orcs? The 2012 box set is Denizens. This one has some fun ones. A rust monster, an intellect devourer, a doppelganger, an Ought-You, the horrific roper, and quite frankly the worst looking beholder miniature ever. But there's a certain nostalgia for those, because despite the poor quality of some of the sculpts, this was always about inspiring your imagination, and you just needed that bit of color and representation on the table, and your mind could still fill in the blanks the miniatures might be lacking. The last set in the line is the Adventuring Party. This is an interesting set because when you look at the figure list for this one, you can see that there's a name for each one of them. Thoth the Dwarf, Rayet the Halfling, Dent the Bard, who has a bagpipe of all things. A very interesting set. In addition to the 2000 series miniatures, there was also the 5000 series, which contained 20 miniatures in a box, or in the case of the final set, the Red Dragon's Lair, which is basically a large miniature with a diorama. The 5000 line consisted of set number 5001 Explorers, which has a large variety of iconic class type miniatures. This is the set I personally still have, and it was always my favorite. Many of the poses and sculpts here to me are just iconic representations of advanced Dungeons & Dragons character types. I mean, you have a cleric turning undead using a cross, holy symbol forcefully held aloft, a paladin armored in full crusader-style plate mail armor and shield. The ranger has a tree engraved on his shield. The halfling thief with his large dagger sticks prominently in my memory as it was used as the player character for one of my friends' halfling thief, Roland, who had legendary status in our group. The magic user holding that scroll when casting a spell. The barbarian with the classic horned Viking helmet, not to mention the lantern bearer and torch bearer hirelings who died many grisly and horrific deaths in our trap-filled dungeons. 5002 provided a healthy variety of monsters, a ghoul, mummy, zombie, skeleton, Medusa, some more useful than others. I mean, what can you do with one skeleton? And the ochre jelly is kind of funny as it's little more than a melted lump of lead. 5003 Woodland Adventures was another useful set as if you're trying to locate a good mini for your player characters with woodland-focused demi-humans, such as elves, gnomes, and halflings, but also rangers, and for some reason, a bard. 5004 Tomb of Spells gives you a total of 6 skeletons, which is great, but also a lich, a mind flayer, a small dragon, a necromancer, a really great variety of iconic boss monsters for your AD&D game. 5009's box set is a diorama of a red dragon's lair and is really quite an iconic set. In addition to a really large red dragon that required much assembly, you got a nice treasure pile, some dragon eggs, and baby dragons. Unfortunately, TSR, true to form, canceled Grenadier's license for the AD&D line because the company had the audacity to want to produce miniatures for other RPGs. Grenadier would keep the line alive for a few years with a rebranding to the Dragon Lord series and release a whole line of other dragons, most likely ones that had been slated for the unreleased AD&D line. Of course, nowadays these Gold Line sets are outrageously priced on eBay and are serious collector's items. They were 25mm scale, and most of today's miniatures are done in 30 to 32mm, making the scale difference really noticeable. Of course, in the late 1980s, plastic miniatures became prominent, especially with the release of the Hero Quest box set, which had many amazing sculpts and also furniture. These were and are a staple at my table. In recent years, miniatures have become even more ubiquitous, primarily due to the WizKids pre-painted plastic miniatures that began to enter the marketplace with their Mage Knight collectible miniatures game in the early 2000s. And that has mutated and ballooned into a rather impressive official Dungeons & Dragons miniatures line. While the early sculpts of these sets and their paints were not the most detailed or impressive representations, in recent years their line has reached an impressive level of quality and refinement, though there have been some missteps along the way. The advent of the OSR in the early 2000s also spawned the rather impressive Otherworld miniatures line, highly impressive pewter miniatures with their sculpts emulating the early works of the AD&D line from Grenadier, and in my opinion were the best to date. If you're looking for those AD&D sculpts without paying collector's prices for Grenadier 25mm scale miniatures, Otherworlds was really the place to go. They were 30mm and highly detailed and painted up beautifully. Sadly, long delivery times and poor customer service ultimately led to their demise in 2024, and now their acquisition on the secondary market essentially puts them in the same status as the Grenadier miniatures line. Expensive. However, in recent years, WizKids has really delved into the classic sculpts of many D&D monsters and characters. The 50th anniversary line especially has some really great sculpts in the classic vein. Various old school resources from the cover of Holmes' basic set to the AD&D monster manual. They've even released an entire line of miniatures inspired directly from those renditions. Boxed with David Sutherland's original artwork for the monster manual, the sculpts and paint jobs here are really impressive and are ready for your table right out of the box, though I think they are still a bit expensive. You can pick up a box set of these for around $70, and there are now a total of 7 box sets with select classic monsters from A to Z, though the U to Z set is yet to be released as of this video, but they are due out August 2025. I really love these. I was especially pleased to add the Beholder to my monster collection, but all of these are a real joy to own. There are many reasons to have miniatures at your gaming table, from the clarity they provide from a purely practical standpoint to the colorful spectacle they offer that fuels the imagination. Their aesthetic appeal is undeniable. From a player's perspective, the right character miniature can inspire and fuel the imagination and the story of their character, and painting that miniature is a pure outlet of personal creativity and expression. Indeed, for me, some of the greatest joy I've had with this hobby is not playing the game, but sitting in quiet relaxation, bringing a lump of metal to life with a vivid array of colors. It's a small ritual, brush in hand, paint on palette, where time slows and imagination takes to the metal. Miniature painting is the hobby within a hobby that lets me slow down, breathe, and create something uniquely mine before it ever hits the table. And when that miniature finally takes its place among friends and foes on the battlefield, it's more than just a figure. It's a piece of my creativity made real, ready to share in the stories we'll tell together. Well, my friends, that's where I'll set down my brush for today, but I'd love to hear from you. Tell me about the characters you've brought to life the monsters that set shivers down your spines, and the figures that became legends in your campaigns. Next week, I'm going to be releasing some Hero Quest content for you, updating my original review from a few years ago, as well as more reviews and even more crafting projects. I'd like to thank all of my patrons who continue to support the channel month after month. Thank you so much. Please give this video a like, comment, and share. Please check out my Teespring store for great gaming swag, t-shirts, carry bags, coffee, mugs, and more. Join the channel's Facebook page, RPG Retro Reviews, and consider supporting the channel by becoming a patron yourself. Or alternatively, you can just send a tip through the PayPal tip jar or use Super Thanks. Links are in the description. As always, my friends, may your D20 roll true and game on.